Hello guys, welcome to another session. In this session, we are going to look into errors and exception in Python. So let's look into the topics which we are going to cover in this session. So here we are going to cover the following topics where we will learn about what is exception. We will learn about some of the jargons which is being used within error and exception topics. Then we will look into points to remember, some of the points, important points we should remember while doing with the error and exception handling. Then we will look into the exceptions handling technique, how to handle any exceptions when it is occur. And then we will look into what are the syntax we follow whenever we are handling or we are writing the error handling techniques within code. Then afterwards we will look into that how to catch any exceptions if it occurs at runtime. And then we will look into else clause which will come with the try block. At final stage we will look into the finally clause, what is the use of finally clause, in what scenario we can use finally clause. So all these things we are going to cover. So let's start our discussion. So first understand that what is error and what is exceptions. So basically when something goes wrong in a computer program, someone needs to know about something goes wrong. And one way of informing other parts of a program is by generating an error object. So what does it mean? So basically when the error propagates, then the user who runs the program needs to know that something has gone wrong. So the user get notified about a problem via a short report on the error. So in summary, we can say that whenever any error occurred, then we need a mechanism by which we can handle those errors. So in this session we will look into those technique as well, but prior to that let's understand that what actually exception is. So exception is nothing but an object within Python, and Python everything is an object. So same like we have an exception class and which has capability to handle the errors. We will look into the hierarchy of exceptions. So look into that. So this is the hierarchy of exceptions within Python. If you look closely, then you will find that we have a base exception class which is being inherited by exception class, and there are variety of other exceptions which is being created, like arithmetic exception. Suppose that if any arithmetic operations related error happened, then we can utilize this class, we can catch those errors, and we will provide a more meaningful information to the user. We will understand this thing with an example. This I am telling you because you can understand that how many types of error there might be a chances that you can get different variety of errors. So we will look into zero division error in an example. The same way you can use it for other type of error as well. So on a shorter note, you can understand that exception is nothing but an object within Python which can be used to handle the error when it occurs, so that user get a better experience while using the program. So let's move further and look into other topic. So other topic we will look into is exception jargon. So what is exception jargon? So there are certain words you should remember whenever we are dealing with exceptions. So basically we are going to get exceptions. So what is an exception? An error which is generated at runtime. That's it. Raising an exception, that means you can intentionally generate an exception to write a more robust program. So sometime we need to raise an exception in certain scenarios while doing the development, so that we can handle those exception and we can write a robust program. If such scenario will happen, then you can handle that exception. Same way there is something called throwing an error. Sometime we need to intentionally trigger the error. So we will look into handling an exception as well. There is something called handling an exception, that means processing code that deals with the error. We can also see that handlers that deals with the error. Signals means a particular type of exception such as out of bound or divide by zero. Divide by zero we are going to look into the example. So every by and then you are going to listen such words and such jargons whenever you are dealing with error and exception objects. Now let's move further. So let's look into the points to remember. So basically whenever we are dealing with a different type of object in Python, sometime we will get that different type of errors and different type of exception. So let's understand with an example over here. So if you look into that, then you will find that we have different type of try catch block. We will look into this try catch block whenever we deal with any exception handling technique, we need to use try and the catch block. So that means whatever the code which you feel like that is going to be a erroneous code or that might generate some error or some exception, so we can write it into the try block. So here what it is telling that different type of error produce different type of exceptions. So that means there might be a chances that if you are doing some wrong division, something you are trying to divide by 0, then it will generate this error. On the same aspect, if your memory get full, then that means it will generate the out of memory error. And again here it is showing an example that how to handle that error. You can also see here there is different variety of error given in the example, like end of file error. So these are some of the exception type. It might arises whenever we are writing and whenever we are writing any program. So we need to deal with such of the exception so that we can give a better user experience to the users. So let's move further and look into the handling an exception. What is handling an exception? So this we will understand with an example, this entire thing. Instead of reading out all this thing, better we can write some program and understand this thing. So let's jump into the editor where we can write the program for exception handling and where we can learn all these topic. So let's jump into the editor. So here now we will write some erroneous code and try to generate some error, and then we will understand that how it is really helpful. Suppose that if we have a function called run calc, something like that, and here you can write some erroneous code, like I am going to write some erroneous code which will generate an error. So here we will try to divide whatever the number we will pass, and we will try to divide by 0. If you try to divide by 0 with any number, then it will give you an error. So now if you try to run with run cal, so see here if you passing any number, then see how or what kind of error we are getting over here. If you run it, see division by 0, so it generated this error. So this is really very bad experience for user if it is happening on the runtime. Suppose that if anybody is trying to run in a production environment with this py file, and if you try to access it and some erroneous buggy code you have written it, and then it will stop that program. So this is not a good experience. So to handle this, the entire exception handling mechanism comes into picture. So let's look into that now. Now to better handle it, what we need to do, we need to write a try except block. Here try, and we are going to call whichever the code which we feel like that might generate an error. So we will write the code in the try block, and then here we need to accept it. In most of the programming language it is going to be a catch block, but in the Python we are using except over here. And here we can specify that whenever we are getting this error, 0 division error, so we need to tell that whenever we are getting, see here it is a keyword, and that's the reason it is the color is little different, and we need to tell that if you are getting such an error, so print some graceful message and move further. There is another code block. So here now we will run it. So if you will run it now, then earlier we used to get this error, but this time we will get a very good error message. So here it has cached this error and it printed that something goes wrong, or we have whatever the custom message we have provided, like we have provided oops no division by 0. So see here how gracefully we have captured the error. So this mechanism is called exception handling. So this is what it is telling, that you can catch an exception by implementing the try except construct. So that's what we did. We have created a try and except block, and we are catching that error. So that is what it is telling. Now moving further, so this is what it is telling, and to do that we have a syntax. We have used this syntax, and we have used the same example over here. So here we will look into some of the examples. If we are trying to run it and if this error is happening, then we need to print that the custom message. Again, might be there is a chances that we will get some index error, then we can create that thing. So there are multiple errors supposed to happen sometime, then we can handle it. So whichever code block it belongs to, that code block get executed, and your program will execute continuously without coming out from the program and giving some erroneous message. So this entire mechanism is called error handling. Now we understand that try and except block, how we are using try and except block to handle the exceptions. Now move further and we will look into the else clause. So what is the use of else clause, we will understand that. Let's go to the code. Now suppose a scenario, we are going to do a little changes over here. We are going to provide another parameter y and we will do it here x divided by y, and we need to provide 7 and 0 this time also 7 and 0, so that it will give a more meaningful information. Now to understand that else block, what we need to do, we need to introduce a else block over here, and if everything goes wrong, everything goes well, then we need to print that all code gets executed without any error. So here this time what we will do, copy this code and we will do little changes over here to understand it. This time we will pass 8 and some value, not 0. So if you will run it and now you will try to execute this one, this block will not executed. Instead of that, else block will get executed. Run it. So why it is so? Because there was no error. So in that scenario we can use else block as well. Or suppose if you want to perform any other activities after execution of the entire code which doesn't have any error, we can write it into the else block. So now we have seen that else clause, when to use a else clause and how to write an else clause. Now we will look into the finally clause. But prior to that, I wanted to give you information about finally clause. Is that finally clause is the clause which will be executed if it is you get an error. If you don't get an error, in both the scenario this clause will be executed. So why it is given so? This has given because suppose that if any error happen and you are having a open database connection, so you don't want to keep it open if any error will happen, or if you don't want to keep it open if your work has been processed from the database. In both the scenario you want to close the session, so you need a mechanism by which you can handle such scenario. So finally clause is one of the way by which you can handle such scenario where we want to close the session database connection after processing. If you get an error in that scenario also, we need to close the database session, and if it were executed properly, we have fetched the data from database, and at the end of the entire processing we need to close the session. So we can write that block of code into finally clause. But here we will look into a simple example so that I can show that how to write the finally clause. But this is one of the important thing you should remember, in what scenario you can use the finally clause. So let's jump into the editor, and here we will have a finally clause, finally, and here we can print I will run every time. So here now you can keep both the scenario. We will check over here. Above scenario is an error condition scenario, below is the perfect execution scenario. So first we will error scenario we can run. So you can find that it given the no division by 0, but it has also executed this code block. Why? Because it is a finally block. I told you that this block will be executed if you get error or if you don't get error. Now we will run for no don't error. There is no error. So run it. In that scenario also, after execution of all the code, it gets executed. So this is the beauty of finally clause. So just remember it. So that's it guys. This is what I wanted to demonstrate you in this session. I believe I have given you good information about error and exception. You learned something in this session. So see you in the next session. Till then, bye bye.